Welcome back. You're watching NewsX with me, Meenakshi, Upreti. The top focus of the bulletin remains the turbulence in Sri Lanka. Lanka's acting president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, has declared a state of emergency according to a government notice released late on Sunday, as his administration seeks to quell social unrest and tackle an economic crisis gripping the island nation. Amidst the emergency, things don't seem to be easing up for Gotabaya Rajapaksa as well. Singapore has issued a notice saying that it will not extend Rajapaksa's stay in the country over 15 days. Will situation ease up for the island nation? Who will save Lanka from the impending doom and gloom which it is staring at? We'll discuss all of this and more. But as of now, my colleague Yash Raju, who's in Sri Lanka, has filed a ground report. He's giving us all the developments from the ground zero. Let's take a look at these reports and then we'll open it up for discussion.
We at NewsX have been present at the Colombo streets, and this is the area very near to immigration area. So huge crowds have been getting gathered at the immigration center over. So let me show you the crowds which have been gathered over the immigration office over here. So this is a huge crowd getting gathered over the immigration office, and they claim that they are not able to manage the expenses in the Sri Lanka now because of the economic crisis, and they have been demanding that the immigration sends them out of the country to work. So this is a clear situation showing out that the Sri Lankan people have been trying to moving out of the country because of the economic crisis, and we are the only channel reporting from the ground zero and showing the reality which is happening over here. That the people of Sri Lanka are very not happy with the situation, and they claim that they wanted to move out of the country on the ongoing situation. We also tried to speak to some of the people over here who are gathered over here and have been waiting from morning 8 a.m. over here, and the huge crowds have been witnessed where the heavy sun, the people have been holding umbrellas in hand and have been waiting for hours and hours. So we also tried to talk to some of the people over here who have been present over here. They have been clearly saying that they have been waiting since morning, and they claim that they wanted to leave this country because of this heavy economic crisis taking place over here in the country. Getting you this exclusive ground report from Ground Zero. This is reporter Yash Raju from Colombo. We at NewsX have been present at the entrance of the Sri Lankan Parliament, so you can see the clear pictures where we mentioned that there's a huge site and security is being given to the Parliament over here. So you can see the clear pictures where this is the first gate of barricade, and there's also nearly 3 to 4 gates of barricade in the between on the way to the Parliament. So now the Parliament is around 1.5 kilometers from this particular location. So this is the area where the protesters were doing a protest few days back, and it was also in a huge controversy. So now heavy police barricade is being done over here. Security checks have been done. Despite having the media pass, we were not allowed inside due to security reasons. So you can see the huge amount of barricades have been placed over here at the Parliament over here, and there's a clear picture that there's an emergency also declared in the situation. So in the upcoming elections, there could be several controversies because of this is the area where the elections will be taking place, and this will be the area where the nominations will be filed tomorrow. Getting you this exclusive ground report from Colombo. This is reporter Yash Raju from Colombo.
My colleague Yash was also live with us. Yash, over to you. Help us understand, first of all, what the ground situation in Lanka looks like. Show us the visuals and also, if possible, do talk to a few people who had earlier been protesting. Protest, of course, still continue. The president, the interim president, has now imposed a state of emergency. What really is the reaction of the people on the ground to the same?
Oh, well, definitely, Meenakshi, as you clearly mentioned, we have been seeing the fight for the next president elections within going on all across Sri Lanka, and we have been witnessing that the emergency situation has also been declared for the state of the country of Sri Lanka. And the past 1 month, there have been 4 times where several emergency situation was given out, and now the protesters have also gone back. When very few numbers of protesters have been gathering at Goldface in Colombo, where they have been clearly mentioning that go back Gota was their agenda, and it was a huge victory for the protesters. So now the many protesters have been walked away from the protest, but there are only 100 people who gathered in the Gotagogama village who have been still protesting against Ranil Wickremesinghe, and they have been clearly mentioning that they do not want Ranil Wickremesinghe to be the acting president or the president of the country.
All right, Yash, thank you for joining us with all these details. Ambassador Mukherjee, I'd like to come to you first. As my colleague Yash was also reporting, the acting president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, as of now, has imposed an emergency in the island nation. Do you think that this move could possibly be counterproductive, considering that there is a lot of anger amidst the general public against not just Rajapaksas but also Wickremesinghe as well?
Well, first of all, Meenakshi, I think that the embattled new acting president of Sri Lanka really didn't have much of a choice, because unless he is able to reimpose rule of law and order, he cannot go through the process which Parliament needs to do of selecting a new government, which can then demonstrate that it has public confidence to go and negotiate that bailout. Moreover, Meenakshi, if a publicly elected government is pushed out in this manner, the president was different. He had been there, his policies were disliked by the people, etc. This acting president was actually brought in at a very late stage by the president who has gone. Now, if you have a situation in Sri Lanka with functional democracy like India, where a mob can decide after a popular election that such a person can stay, such a person can go, then you occupy the buildings, you bring down rule of law, you give the impression that Sri Lanka is under anarchy, then what you do is, Meenakshi, you do not create the conditions by which any creditor, IMF or otherwise, will extend the bailout required to bring Sri Lanka back to normal. Under those circumstances, while I am opposed to emergency because it is a suspension of civil liberties, I hope that it is of a short duration, but I presume that the acting president did it so as to restore rule of law and to ensure Parliament to elect a new government where he is a candidate and others are candidates, and Parliament is sovereign to decide who is going to rule Sri Lanka during this trouble period, is what I would say. But of course, we have a Sri Lankan colleague on the panel and he would...
Point taken, ma'am. We are also being joined by Professor Rohan Samarajava. He is an author from Sri Lanka and he was also associated with the Sri Lankan ministry from 2002 to 4. Thank you, sir, for joining us on NewsX. First question, help us understand what is the situation like in the island nation. The acting president as of now had to impose an emergency. Protests, are they still continuing? And what really is the situation when we speak of the scarcity of fuel, electricity, etc. In Lanka, sir?
The state of emergency has been declared, it is true, but within 30 days, it has to be confirmed by Parliament. And it's quite likely that it will be withdrawn before that. The real nuts and bolts of these things are not the declaration, but the regulations that are made once the declaration has been made. Now, I have yet to see what the actual regulations are. I think the immediate cause is that they want to get ready for, again, to prepare to prevent any kind of attacks on Parliament itself on the 20th, when there will be the constitutionally defined election where the 225 MPs will form themselves into an electoral college and vote for a president by a simple majority through secret ballot. And possibly against attacks on the homes of the MPs, as has been threatened. Now, I would like to think, given the overall peaceful nature of the Occupy movement for the last 3 months, that the fears of violence are unfounded. But unfortunately, on the 14th, we saw that some extremist groups had actively worked from the 13th onwards. Some weapons from the armed forces had been taken for the very first time, and ambulances had been attacked. So there are some indications that the extremist activity is present, as can be the case with any kind of mob situation. So I think the government has to be very careful in responding, as Ambassador Mukherjee said, but also not in overshooting and creating hostility and and fear, unnecessary amount of fear and hostility. The overall situation is actually slowly returning to normal. It has been recognized that in the present circumstances, the old patterns of fuel consumption cannot be supported, and a electronically based rationing scheme has been initiated, and people are downloading the app, and they will be given certain quotas, certain amounts per month, per vehicle in a verified manner. Of course, some things have to be worked out, how to provide fuel for agricultural machinery, for boats, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
The household gas situation seems to be turning to normal very rapidly. So I think progress is being made.
Right, but what next for Sri Lanka, sir? Because end of the day, there needs to be a government in place. I mean, Wickremesinghe is only an acting, president, to say the least, and you need political stability if you are to approach IMF or other organizations and ask for help.
The negotiations with the IMF are ongoing with the officials. In fact, high-level negotiations with Japan took place with the Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Secretary of the Ministry of Finance, and the Central Bank Governor just yesterday. It is good that these activities are going on. According to the Constitution of Sri Lanka, which is a rather peculiar document that a lot of people have difficulty understanding because it's neither fish nor fowl. It's not an executive president system like the United States, nor is it a sort of parliamentary system like India. It's something in between. So the actual direction and control of the executive is in the hands of the cabinet. And right now we have a functioning cabinet but we have a prime minister who's also acting as president who needs to be replaced quickly. So what we are waiting for, and we are looking for this president to give up his powers, because that has been a commitment he has made, that he will revert to the 19th Amendment that took away a large amount of the president's powers. So what we want is a situation where a, so to speak, disempowered president and a prime minister and a newly constituted cabinet, hopefully all-party or a multi-party cabinet, will take charge. And that is the solution we are waiting for. We would have preferred if the president would have been elected unanimously, but unfortunately all our efforts to get that done did not succeed.
Okay, point taken. Vijay Kranti sir, if you could come in the conversation here as well, since you're a China expert. Very interesting that China has completely turned its back on the Rajapaksas. Of course, it's going to be a very ignominious and a very humiliating exit for the Rajapaksas from Singapore. Singapore has very clearly shut their doors. The Rajapaksas told them to exit the country at the earliest, but their all-weather friend China, who had invested so heavily in Lanka during their rule, seems to be completely mum, has not offered them a haven or a shelter at all. All right, we seem to have lost that line with Vijay Kranti. Madhav Nalapat sir, would you like to take that question? China's role also, rather their conspicuous silence also in focus at the moment, isn't it, sir?
Well, there's no, the point is very simple, and I think our distinguished Sri Lankan panelists touched upon that, that there may be some interested parties, international parties, who want to see a collapse in Sri Lanka, which will ensure that assets are priced at a very cheap rate. So Sri Lankan people have extraordinary brain power, and essentially Sri Lanka is, in terms of potential, a very a middle-income country. So if you get assets cheap, and I think there's at least one power, and you have named that power, China, that has already grabbed some very key assets in Sri Lanka. Colombo port, for example, Hambantota, north and south. These have essentially become Chinese enclaves, and there are multiple other Chinese enclaves across Sri Lanka. So they have a vested interest, certainly, in seeing this collapse, and they obviously are not doing anything to prevent this ongoing collapse. I am delighted, frankly, and I'd like to say I'm a strong supporter of human rights, but I do also believe, I'm also a strong supporter of non-violence, and I think if ever there was justification for declaration of emergency, this was it. And Ranil Wickremesinghe is certainly no autocrat. He is a democrat, and there is no question about that. And if I'm not mistaken, there are members of Rajapaksa family. If my information is correct, Mahinda Rajapaksa, for example, who is still very much in Sri Lanka. From my information, he is very much in Sri Lanka, and he has indicated that he is going nowhere. So I'd like to say very clearly that yes, you cannot create a system in which government is impossible. You have to have a governance system, and Sri Lanka has to go through a transition from illiberal, autocratic errors by the president. All right, assume that, into a system where you have, as correctly said, an all-party government, and that takes responsibility for that. Because I don't believe the country should be put through the trauma of an election and the problems that creates for some time to come. So I'm hopeful that this will happen. And as I said, Ranil Wickremesinghe is a Democrat. Whatever his other failings, he's a Democrat. The Sri Lankan people have shown their commitment to the peace process and to democracy. And the good thing about this, it has brought the Tamil community, and it has brought the Sinhalese, it has brought the Buddhists, the Hindus, and the Muslims close together.
Fair enough. And Ambassador Vohra, if you could come in here talking about the role of India, because we've discussed extensively on the strategic importance of Sri Lanka for India. What do you think the role which India can play? India has done all it can. It has been an all-weather friend to Sri Lanka, in sharp contrast to China. In the future, how do you think India can help bring some stability into the island nation, which has seen extremely tumultuous times, sir?
Thank you very much. Ma'am, always a pleasure to be with you on NewsX, to listen to Professor Madhav Nalapat. I learned from him. I learned from Professor Rohan, all the other wonderful people. Before talking about India, everybody knows what India can do, what India has been doing. Will the state of emergency help Professor Nalapat? Not at all. It never does. I've seen it in many countries. It fuels the conflagration. Or the military will bash in a few heads. The people will become even more sullen. The world will condemn the use of excessive force. The United Nations will pass resolutions calling for a peaceful transfer of power. Whoever is elected president of Sri Lanka by the parliament should be accepted by the people. The mob will not decide. Of course, they've tasted victory in booting up Gotabaya. I have not seen this kind of unpopularity in a leader from the time of, there used to be a character called the Shah of Iran who claimed to be the Shahenshah, the ruler of the world, and then when he was booted out, nobody was willing to accept him. Even the moon said, we don't want you. What will India do, ma'am? What is our capacity? We've been doing whatever we can. I'm right at this moment as speaking to you. I'm fairly close to Sri Lanka. I'm in Chennai at the magnificent Officers Training Academy. I was speaking to them, and we've been training Sri Lankan officers here also. They are not happy at all with the situation in Sri Lanka. They feel that democracy has to be restored as quickly as possible. And they're also saying that, and this has been said by everybody, that only India has been helping to the extent that is can. Can we pull their chestnuts out of the fire indefinitely? No. Ma'am, I'm a development economist. Everybody else and his grandmother and the grandmother's neighbor will tell you what Sri Lanka's problem is. We know all that. What of the future? Restructuring of the economy, perhaps debt forgiveness to a large extent, and a leadership that enjoys popular support. That to me seems to be the golden triangle for Sri Lanka in the days and months ahead. Will it be resolved overnight? Not a chance in hell. It's going to take at least 5 years. Professor Rohan, I'm extremely sorry to have to say this, but this is my experience. Doesn't happen. Finally, ma'am, let me just conclude.
Right.
And I will hold my peace. Finally, what do the people of India want? What do the people of Tamil Nadu, this beautiful state where I am? All they say is, we wish Sri Lanka all the best.
Point taken. Professor, Samrajava, if you'd like to come in here, sir. Far as India is concerned, India has been an all-weather friend of Sri Lanka. But what really is the sentiment prevailing on China? Because many experts have also been pointing out the alleged debt trap in which China, of course, got Sri Lanka. And many say that's one of the reasons why Sri Lanka is in such a situation today.
Well, I'd like to begin with a small correction, saying that our biggest problem is not Chinese debt. Our biggest problem is something called international sovereign bonds. We went to the commercial debt market, and that was about 50% of our debt stock, and that was where the real problem was. China's debt is not ideal, and it was spent on things like an airport that airlines refused to land in, and so on. But that really the blame lies with us, with the government of Sri Lanka, which asked for money for ill-conceived projects without feasibility. And that is a great pity, but I think we are equally to blame. So I think it's the debt trap story that the Western media pushed out is a little bit overstated. But we have a problem with the Chinese debt, of course, which is that they have a number of countries in similar conditions like us, Zambia, Ghana, and so on. And they are very wary about creating a precedent in terms of agreeing to restructuring terms that the Paris Club countries would. So, but then, of course, everybody knows that in debt restructuring, all parties have to be treated equally. So that is a challenge that we have to face. I believe that Professor Nalapat slightly overstated the situation with the Chinese enclaves. Yes, we have given a southern port on a 99-year lease, but even there, we have significant control for the government of Sri Lanka. And there is only one of the 5 terminals in the port of Colombo that is given to a Chinese company on a 30-year lease. One has actually been given to a partnership comprising Adani's, who just had a similar arrangement in Israel. So things are not as bad as they appear from the outside. But of course, all this has to be judiciously managed because now the country is in a position of vulnerability and has lost negotiating strength. Now, what we want is for a all-party or multi-party government that will negotiate carefully and will have considerable oversight from citizens through the committee system that we are hoping to strengthen.
Point taken. Madhav Nalapat sir, if you'd like to come in here, what next for Sri Lanka, sir, as we conclude the debate, sir?
See, I'd like to say that Sri Lanka is, from its positionally, absolutely vital to the maintenance of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And we all know the power that it wants to control the Indo-Pacific and basically ensure that it is no longer free and open. Already the South China Sea, it is trying to convert it into a Chinese lake. And of course, you know, the professor is obviously defending his country, and I salute his patriotism. But I'd like to say that, you know, the world today is increasingly splitting into 2 camps. And given its positional importance, Sri Lanka needs to come to the camp of the democracies. And that includes India, the United States, Japan, Australia, the EU. And may I make a final point? Sri Lanka and many millions of families are being kept afloat today by the remittances that they are getting from relatives. They are not staying in China. They are not staying there at all. They are staying in Europe. They are staying in North America. And some of them are also staying in India. Why? Because as a democracy, it is intrinsically linked to other democracies. And that choice a similar leader has to make. The Rajapaksas, I'm sorry to say, some of them like Basil Rajapaksa were in the pocket of the Chinese. Others were ambivalent. And this has been the downfall that caused his economic collapse, that has caused their collapse.
Well, exactly, and there is no doubt about that. There are a multitude of factors which led to the downward slide of Lanka. But China factor, that's something which cannot be ignored. Far as India is concerned, For India, Lanka has a deep strategic importance, be it, of course, from a safety and security point of view, or, of course, our long-standing cultural ties with Sri Lanka. India has done all it can, in fact, will continue to do more to help Lanka in this need of our.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.